So I will call our meeting to order of the PSC for today, August 11th. And I'll start off in keeping with Oregon Public Meetings Law, statutory land use requirements, and Title 33 of the Portland City Code. The Portland Planning Sustainability Commission is holding this meeting virtually. I promised I was seeing this in song last time, but I haven't come up with one yet. All members of the PSC are attending remotely, and the city has made several avenues available for the public to watch the broadcast of this meeting. The PSC is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, humor, flexibility, and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to do the city's business. We'll open today with our consent agenda, which is consideration of minutes from the July 28th, 2020 PSC meeting. Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Steph.
Second.
Second from Chris. All in favor, raise your virtual hands.
Where is it?
It's a good practice. Or your real hands is fine too. Thank you. Okay, that passes. And so we have adopted the minutes, and I will pass it over to items of interest from commissioners. I'm getting one from Mike.
Yeah, a couple things. We got a follow-up letter from Josh from the Oregon State Marine Board indicating that their process that we participated in, the hearing recently, is continuing. And in fact, they're going to have yet another hearing. And I am anxious for us to remain involved in the Marine Board's deliberation about rule changes on the lower Willamette River. Steph has indicated an interest, assuming she has time with other priorities, to continue providing our input as we decided some time ago. So unless there's some problem with that from my colleagues, I'd like to continue providing our input as actually we were invited by the Marine Board to continue our involvement.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
I don't know if people.
Do people have any concerns with us continuing to have input on that process? I'm hearing no concerns, so I think
The only comment I would add is that we just need to coordinate across the city with bureaus that are interested in this, including fire.
Yeah, we got that. And a second point, I forgot the fact that Debbie Bischoff is actually formally retired from BPS, but she's still on contract, I believe. Is that the case? At any rate, I thought did some incredible work along with the rest of staff, but I think it would be nice for the PSC to send a note on behalf of the PSC thanking her for her service at the Bureau and the work she did on the South Reach planning process.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll work with you on that.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Chris and then Katie.
Yeah, I'll just mention very briefly that we had the first meeting of the reconstituted Southwest Corridor Task Force of this group, and good meeting. I think we have a number of folks committed to the work, and we got everybody up to speed on sort of the current state. So appreciate folks participating in that. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Katie.
Yeah, this is just a minor thing, but I got in the mail the document that we send out to folks on the tree code and how to testify in the tree code. And I noticed that it says 2 o'clock, which is when the meeting starts, but I think the testimony takes place at 3:30. And I noticed that the last few times we've had testimony online, folks kind of complained that they'd been on there for a long, long time, that they had been on since the start of the meeting. So I'm wondering if that needs to be looked at. I could be wrong. I mean, I'm looking at this. I thought that it was time certain that we would take testimony at 3:30, but this doesn't mention that. It just says that it starts at 2.
So Katie, I can reply to that. for the Measure 56 notices, they have to be sent out before we actually finalize the PSC agenda. The timing is just a little bit off. So we always put the beginning of the meeting time for the PSC meeting, and you'll note on that message, it should also say, please check or call a number like 7 days in advance of the hearing date to confirm the time for this agenda item. I think that is some line on there. And that's when we can say for sure that that's the time certain that that agenda item will start. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I know it's a little convoluted. It's just how the timing and sequencing of when notices need to go is a little.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I wonder if that could be bigger. And then also I'm hoping that when they do call in to get a date or get signed up, that they somehow can be updated at that time. Maybe that's happening already.
Yes. And that is when that happens. Yes.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. Good point. And unless I'm mistaken, this is a joint hearing with the Urban Forestry Commission. Is that correct? Still?
Correct. September 8th is yeah.
Okay. Okay. If there's not some additional, Mike, you putting your hand back up? Sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I got a fair amount of feedback on this, and having testified myself many, many times before the PSC and other bodies, going to the minute and a half, I think, is problematic. I realize we've got time constraints, but people take the effort to put a lot of thought into providing us with input. Three minutes was already pushing it from my perspective in terms of getting information out. But I have noticed that 2 minutes, people can really get their thoughts out. And I would personally prefer that we stick with the 2 minute time frame for testimony.
I agree with that. It felt uncomfortable at this last public hearing, having people, and even many did effectively get to 2 minutes, but especially for people who are new testifying, it's hard to make sure you get the points across in the time. Thanks for that.
Hey, I've been thinking about that a little bit too, and I would like to recommend, and I'm happy to provide some capacity to do this, but in advance of every hearing, especially because we have this capability through Zoom, and maybe if we start meeting in person again, we can still hold this space through Zoom, just doing a quick check-in, a space where folks can come and talk to a commissioner about testifying. Like, as a lobbyist, I can provide some good tips. If you write something down, you don't always have to say it. Like, providing a little bit of coaching opportunity and just giving folks some resources. And I think we should do that before every hearing, whether it's immediately before or a few days before, so people have time. But just giving more space, because there are folks who are pros at testifying because they do it all the time and they don't think about it. And are much better at pivoting if we have to reduce time for constraint options, although I agree that I don't think we should do that. But just in the interest of being a friendlier body, let's provide space so that if folks want to, be clear that that's not a new space to lobby us, but ask questions about how to testify or get advice and feedback, we can help it be a better experience for them and help better set expectations.
Thank you. I'm seeing Katie's your hand still up? Okay, Steph.
Thank you. I know that there's a lot happening in our world right now, and so it's easy to miss that the U.S. Census has stepped up its deadline to September 30th. As of last week, only 63% of the nation's households have been enumerated, have responded, and that tracks with Oregon's. That has significant impacts on 10 years worth of funding for education, healthcare, land use and transportation planning, as well as representation on state and federal levels in our democracy. So just wanted to mention that, to the extent that we can all in our various capacities ensure that people feel comfortable responding and supported, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to follow up one moment on Oriana's point also is we put on, following our last hearing on our officers meeting agenda coming up this Thursday, to talk about ways we can be more welcoming as a commission, and my role as chair and how many things I have to juggle. I think we can do some creative things to make it a more friendly environment despite the Zoom setting. So if you have additional ideas in the next day or two, please send them in so we can figure out if we can adjust our format a little bit to be a little bit more welcoming and open. Any more comments now? Okay, then I'm going to hand it over to Andrea Durbin for the director's report. Thank you, Andrea. Oh, I saw Jeff's hand go up just now. Jeff, did you have something or are you practicing?
Well, I never hurts to practice. I just had a quick comment question as you're looking at ways to handle hearings differently. I've been in a couple of hearings in other jurisdictions where when I testify, they can see me and I can see them. Is there a way we could do that? Because I think it would, again, trying to be more welcoming to people who are testifying if we were visually connected. I don't know if that's technologically difficult or not, but just something to think about.
As host, I think that would be great. I don't know the tech side of it though. Thank you. Okay, Andrea.
Thank you very much. What I want to share today for my director's report is an acknowledgement of the loss of one of our colleagues and friends at BPS. On July 31st, Tony Lamb died from suicide. His loss has reverberated across our bureau, the city, and the community because Tony was so beloved. For those of you that did not know Tony, he filled a room with joy and energy. He was passionate about racial justice and worked hard to create and support community. Tony was a planner focused on racial equity and passionate about using the tools of land use to create a more racially just community and to begin to address the harms of the past. Tony was a part of our team that worked on the report we released last year about the racist history of land use and zoning in Portland. He shared the report and those lessons with different stakeholders, both inside the city and out. Tony was also part of our anti-displacement team, doing research to assemble the current strategies and practices Portland and other cities use to stabilize residents and businesses, and also helping us think of new strategies. We will hear more about that work this afternoon. And Tony was a leader amongst our BIPOC staff, helping us think about how we change as a bureau to center racial justice in our work and change the systems and practices at BPS and across the city to create inclusive and safe places for BIPOC staff. He helped shine the light on our practices that need to change. As Donnie Oliveira and I shared at the last commission meeting with our progress report of our 5-year racial equity plan, we've made some progress, but we have a lot of work to do. That is the work that I'm committed to carrying out and working with our staff across the Bureau. One way we honor Tony and his legacy is to double down on our racial justice work, both in how we center racial justice in our work and prioritizing and creating more space for that work, and also making internal changes in how we operate. What I did not understand was the depth of Tony's personal struggle. The other way we honor Tony is to speak out about mental health struggles and the recognition that many people struggle and are struggling more than ever today with COVID, the national reckoning with race and racism, and our economic downturn that is introducing new pressures on people. We need to find ways to support one another, our colleagues, our family, our friends during these really hard times. And the city needs to make sure that we are providing culturally supportive mental health services to all of our BIPOC staff. I want to appreciate the Commission for taking a moment to recognize and appreciate Tony's legacy and impact. We have lost a gentle soul, a passionate activist, a change agent, a community leader, a community connector. And with that, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence to honor Tony. Thank you. I know that there are a couple of commissioners that also knew Tony and worked with him. I'd like to invite Commissioner Routh and Commissioner Magnera to share a few words to honor Tony as well this afternoon. Thank you. Commissioner Routh.
Sure, and I don't know if Commissioner Larcell also wanted to, but yeah, Tony was ubiquitous. He was, when I was thinking about him the last week, I was thinking, he was just a bumblebee for justice and planning. Like he was, I knew him through, working for a little bit at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and just being able to, casually have, you could just walk up to Tony and start with what started with a casual conversation and quickly became a very deep and meaningful conversation. And every conversation with him was a true joy. He served on Fixing Our Streets Oversight Committee. He's been involved in the Rosewood Initiative, and he just created across the city in so many different environments just a supportive, thoughtful, interconnected, holistic space of change that was filled with humanity and just empathy and love. And I think one of the hardest things of losing anyone, but losing someone like Tony is just the city doesn't know what it lost. And we have lost to think about the profundity of the loss of all tomorrows with Tony is significant. And let's finish. I am wearing my community cycling center shirt in honor of Tony because he was a board member. And just Tony, we're gonna miss the hell out of you. Thanks. Oriana.
I've been thinking about shock, and just to warn everybody, I'm gonna cry a lot. So we're just gonna cry on the public record. I've been thinking about shock, something surprising and upsetting, a sudden disruption in a body that now must rewire for a new reality. A community is a body, and those of us who were in community with Tony are reeling from the seismic jolt of his death. Shock is a matter of perspective. We think we see the whole of someone when really we teeter at a veneer above hidden multitudes. I was close enough to Tony to know that his incredible resilience lay in his ability to delicately fold together many and sometimes conflicting identities. That the fierce and tender way he showed up in different spaces and lives drew from deep wells of empathy and a complexity of experience. Tony was always real, but there were few places in which he could and did show up as his full self. It is easy to confuse the two. We believe that when someone is consistently unafraid to speak truth to power, they are unfurled before us. But we are capable of holding so many complexities within us, and for many, it is unsafe to reveal every dimension. Suicide is often described as shocking, especially when it precipitates the loss of someone who is viewed as accomplished, ambitious, brilliant, charismatic, exuberant, a fighter. Tony was all of these things, but we are not well served by a dichotomy between excellence and struggle. It is false. It is often the people who show up the boldest, the kindest, or the most playful who use these traits to cover deep wounds. And this was Tony too. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. A friend recently shared this Leonard Cohen line, and it keeps playing in my head. Tony felt tremendous pressure to hide his cracks. I'm going to take a moment to share my own cracks, and I want to be clear that my intent is not to make the passing of a Black man about my experience as a white woman, but instead to practice radical vulnerability on the public record. I want also to acknowledge that my race and my position of power afford me this privilege, that as a Black man, and in particular as someone without a permanent position at this bureau, Tony was at a far greater risk if he told his truth. Finally, I should name that what I'm about to say may be a trigger for some people. So I'm going to put, I don't think I have screen sharing privileges, but we'll share the Multnomah County Mental Health Crisis Line and hope perhaps we can share that as a body out more widely. The number is 503-988-4888, and I have co-hosting abilities now, so I will pause to put it up. And I'd like to invite anyone who needs to virtually step out and take a break at this time for any reason to do so without judgment. I have wrestled with depression, anxiety, disordered eating, and self-harm for most of my life. In January, I tried to kill myself after our PSC retreat. I felt an incredible amount of shame coming out of that space, and it exploded the next morning when I woke up to an article that framed me as a white savior. I cycled through a series of mistakes that allowed this narrative to be published. The harm I perceived that resulted felt insurmountable. I felt too destructive to continue to exist. But I was able to dig deep inside myself to see that these were thoughts and not realities, and I sought help. I was almost too late. My heart stopped and had to be shocked back to life in the ambulance. I'm grateful to be alive today, grateful to be doing this work, grateful to the people who loved and supported me then and now, and grateful for the time I knew Tony. A joy in the past week has been hearing story after story of people who felt the warmth of Tony's sun. I certainly did. But it has also been cathartic and feels important to hold space for anger at the ways in which that light was so frequently diminished. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability failed Tony. It failed him again and again, just as it has failed and lost other BIPOC, especially Black staff, in less tragic ways. We failed Tony. We, the Planning and Sustainability Commission, are the body that is meant to hold BPS accountable, but we are complicit in longstanding and institutional practices that have done and do harm. Tony's death is a shock in that it has short-circuited a culture in which racial equity is addressed nominally, while internally and externally perpetuating systems of oppression and white supremacy. This is a reckoning. This is an emergency. Rebecca Solnit reminds us that inside the word emergency is emerge. We are at a hairpin, not a dead end. Tony consistently laid the groundwork for change. He left behind documents and ideas that clearly articulate what actions must be taken to transform the Bureau and our city. We have a map to find our way. Tony's email signature ended with, "The most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity." He got that quote from a TV show about people surviving alone in the wilderness. Tony was surviving in his own wilderness through sheer force of tenacity. We must be tenacious too, and when we are ready, we must decide to act. Change must move at the speed of grief. Healing and reparations for BIPOC staff and the communities that Tony touched must be prioritized. These are the first steps and are not separate from the work. But if I knew Tony, he would have kept grinding, could have kept hustling, would have kept pushing. And I don't want to lose sight of his big vision. So I'm going to grind and hustle and push for radical transformation in honor of his memory. Tony was supposed to present his anti-displacement work today, and our recent focus on racial justice is a direct result of internal organizing to which he contributed greatly. He and I were working together to amplify and codify this, and I'd like to share some context for how that effort came to be. And we will hear later about Tony's contributions and guidance around anti-displacement. As a Black man who loved to run, Tony was deeply affected by the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Already one to think about how he navigated space, how spaces were designed to be navigated, and by whom, he felt the constant danger of a world constructed to protect white women like me and harm him. Shortly after Tony ran 2.3 miles in honor of Ahmaud Arbery's birthday, he humbled me when I tried to cross the street against a light. He reminded me that I held a privilege of safety and rule breaking in a world that was constantly trying to kill him for any or often no infraction. I thought about this whenever we were in protest spaces, what it meant to put my body on the line before his. And I thought about this when, energized by the streets, he wanted BPS to explicitly add to the call from the Portland African American Leadership Forum and Unite Oregon to defund and dismantle the police. At a time when his job was uncertain and unstable, Tony still spoke up, demanded action, and made himself vulnerable. Tony was courageous. As organizing shifted to address injustices within BPS and forward the actions in the PALF People's Plan, I helped create a container in the PSC to receive the generative work. Tony and I wrote language to change Title 3.33 of the City Code to give PBS an explicit charge for racial justice and accountability for the racist history of planning. If that was the direction in which the organizing collective wanted to move or chooses to move when it is ready. During the first PSC meeting centered on racial justice, Tony and I texted back and forth. He got more excited as he started thinking bigger, a racial justice state land use goal. He later remarked that such a milestone would cement someone's legacy if it were achieved. I want that for him. I will fight with fury and love to make that happen, but I cannot fight alone, and many of you hold other pieces of Tony's legacy. I keep coming back to Nipsey Hussle with Tony. Today with the lines, dedication, hard work plus patience, the sum of all my sacrifice, I'm done waiting. Tony cannot continue this work. He will never see the sweeping changes he saw as necessary but were constantly deferred. He will never bear the racial equity planner title he hoped to create. Now, we are all responsible for his legacy, and we will never lose him if we continue to hold true to the course he set. Tony lives in the courageous, brilliant, tenacious, and resilient passion we must all channel around. May Tony rest in power. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Oriana. Thank you, Steph.
Can I just say, let's hold each other, and especially Oriana and Steph and Tony in our hearts together. Let's hold each other in our hearts together.
Thank you, Reverend Larcel. I'm not even sure who comes up for a nice session in the meeting, because it would have been Tony, the anti-displacement plan. I did not get to know him, and we have some of his work in front of us now. So I guess I'd like to invite whoever is going to be leading the segment from staff to let us know who it is, and let's step up to it.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Tom Armstrong. Andrea Pastor and I will be talking about the anti-displacement work. I just want to acknowledge and appreciate everything that Steph and Oriana said. It really resonated with me. Tony was a part of my team since 2017 when he came to BPS as an intern while I was earning his master's degree at PSU. I always admired him as someone that brought a lot of passion and conviction to his work. And, you know, as was discussed here, I mean, he was really what we aspire at BPS to be, as a really powerful combination of expertise and lived experience. And what has amazed me in the wake of his death is just the deep connections that he had in this community and across Portland. You know, and it just leaves me with a profound sense of loss and what could have been, but also a renewed commitment to see him reflected in my work and in this work that we'll talk about today, which is just getting started. And he brought so many ideas to the table here that, you know, we want to see that carried through as one of many contributors to this work. So I think, JP, can you share the screen, share the slideshow? Oh, Andrea has that. Okay. So what we have this afternoon is an update on the Anti-Displacement Action Plan. We've really spent this year doing a couple of different things. One, earlier this year, we spent a lot of time getting a community grant of city funds to PALF so that they could hire a community organizer to help us get a deeper outreach into the community. And that was done with city funds. In addition to, there's also additional money available that we'll be working with PALF and a steering committee on making additional grants to other community groups to participate in this process. We also worked with PALF and were able to secure a Metro Community Engagement Grant that will fund the community organizer position all the way through the end of December of 2021. So we have a good structure in place to support community engagement because, as you'll see, a key part of this process is for it to be co-created and co-led with the community. The other thing that we've done also has been, and as you saw in the summary memo, we've been working with other city bureaus on what we're calling a foundation report that really captures where the city is at today in terms of our anti-displacement work, both the policy framework, the analytical tools, the mapping, the risk typology mapping that Tony was involved with, and some of the other measures and metrics, as well as an inventory of the current actions that the city is doing in terms of anti-displacement and mitigation. And then the third thing that we've been doing that Andrea will talk a little bit more about in just a minute is the Anti-Displacement Task Force and working with our community partners to stand up that task force. And so just a reminder of how we got here, the issue around displacement has really came to the fore in as part of the comp plan, and a coalition of community groups came forward with, I believe, a set of at least a dozen different policy ideas that both BPS staff and the PSC worked to insert into the comp plan. And one of the important elements was sort of beginning to define what we mean by displacement and or gentrification. That's a term that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But what we're really focused on can be considered economic displacement or involuntary displacement. It's not so much the old school, the 50s, 60s urban renewal highway building that we saw in the Lower Albina neighborhood when the Memorial Coliseum was built, or when I-5 was built, or the Legacy Emmanuel Hospital when property was taken and people were physically displaced from their homes and their neighborhood. What we're talking about is a little bit more subtle. It's when changes in a neighborhood result in both increasing market values, rents, home values, but that also, what we're seeing is it also leads to a change in the neighborhood culture, and changes as in shops or what goods and services are available, that, really erodes your sense of place, that even if you could figure out to hang on in terms of being able to afford a rent, or maybe if you're lucky enough to own a home, you can hang on in the neighborhood, but the neighborhood has changed around you. And you no longer feel that sense of place. And so where we've most seen that is in the inner northeast Albina neighborhoods, where the Black community has been displaced largely to East Portland and the Rockwood area. We did a study for Prosper Portland a year or two ago that really looked at the inner northeast effects, and the fact that 4,000 Black households have been displaced from the inner northeast neighborhoods since the year 2000. This graphic is one that we put together that really sort of gets at the cycles that a neighborhood can go through that leads to the displacement and the disparities. If you think especially the example of inner northeast Portland, where you really had a disinvestment in that community through redlining and through public decisions around infrastructure investments and maintenance. And then that all really started to turn around in the 1990s when at the same time you had really a back to the city movement, or a reverse white flight, where young white households decided they want to stay in the city, and the popularity of living close to the central city, living in the old streetcar neighborhood commercial business districts became attractive. And that in turn, or combined with investment in amenities like the Yellow Line Max train and zoning changes, really enabled a lot of development that turned around these neighborhoods, that was sort of a cycle that fed on each other in terms of escalating property values and rents, and a wholesale change in the community, which is what led to the displacement of BIPOC communities. And then what we've seen also is, not only has this led to racial disparities and displacement to what we call lower opportunity areas with less infrastructure, fewer parks, more distant from job opportunities, less transit connections, but also that neighborhood that has gentrified and changed. We can also see that increase in affluence has led to a decline in transit use and has eroded some of our other goals in terms of carbon reduction and climate change and reducing reliance on automobiles. So, addressing displacement and moving towards a more equitable development strategy is both an environmental justice as well as a racial justice strategy. So the policy framework in the comp plan, there's a number of different policies that really give us levers to help guide our actions. And this not only applies to zoning changes, which you've seen how we've tried to address that in projects like the Better Housing by Design changes, by the residential infill project, but also for major infrastructure investments. So some of the things that we're trying to do with the Southwest Corridor Equitable Development Strategy. But what we want to do is when we make these major decisions, we want to analyze those impacts and try and mitigate expected harms. We want to try and leverage private investment for public benefit through programs like inclusionary housing and the affordable commercial bonus that we now have in our zoning code. And then we want to look at the combination of what makes a community, the empowerment and voice of the community, the economic opportunity, as well as affordable housing and the environmental justice issues that all combine to be that community. So we have, like I said, we have a number of different things that we have in place, but that we recognize are not enough, and that we need to do more. And the purpose of this project is to be both collaborative with city bureaus as well as the community to figure out what's going to be effective in terms of doing more. You know, we've done a lot in the last few years, you know, especially in terms of housing affordability and trying to keep our most vulnerable renters in their homes and to produce more affordable housing. Let's go to the next one. And so what we really are looking at is trying to move further upstream in these decision-making processes, and not so much figure out how we can mitigate the impacts, but how can we produce equitable outcomes from the beginning? And I think what we've learned, and Andrea will talk a little bit about how we got, you know, started, or not necessarily how we got started, but how this process really got a boost from our work with Policy Link, but really working with BIPOC communities up front so that they can enjoy the benefits and share in the benefits of equitable development all through the process, and that it's not as much an afterthought or a catch-up game like we've been playing in inner Northeast. So I'm going to turn things over to Andrea Pastor. She's a senior economic planner at BPS and has been leading this project effort, and have her talk a little bit about this policy link process that we went through, and the task force process that we're currently trying to stand up.
Thanks, Tom. So yeah, as Tom mentioned, a lot of this project is based around the work that happened last year in 2019 with Policy Link. It culminated in a 3-day convening between city and community leaders. And the result of that meeting was outlined in a memo that contained the recommendations that you see here. They focused on racial equity and how it must define both how the city operates and what's prioritized for anti-displacement work. They urged the city to identify a target population. And in that weekend, the group identified Black, Indigenous, and people of color as the target group to kind of focus their work around. Focus policies that will actively address near-term displacement pressures in communities. Commit to a process that is led by people and communities most impacted by displacement and racial inequities. Be prepared for a long-term commitment, particularly a long-term commitment of resources, and build in accountability, transparency, and measurement for every goal and action. So these recommendations and next steps outlined in that memo form the basis for this current work. As Tom mentioned, we have both through grants from the City of Portland and Metro committed multi-year funding for the Anti-Displacement Coalition by funding their Community Coalition Organizer position. They will serve an active role in advocacy and organizing to advance the needs of the community that are identified in the project. The second step was to create a community-led anti-displacement task force, which will be a collaborative effort between the Bureau leadership and community members to make policy and program recommendations to City Council. We'll be opening applications to this new advisory body next week and hope to recruit about 15 participants who will commit to the project for the next year and a half. And the next two steps would be part of the Anti-Displacement Task Force's charge. In addition to identifying policy and program gaps that could help the city reach our anti-displacement goals, they'll also work together to identify a permanent source of funding for this anti-displacement work. And finally, the Anti-Displacement Task Force will determine the goals, outcomes, and metrics that the City of Portland will track annually and then assign to report to City Council over time to ensure that we're making steady progress in stabilizing our communities. Our recruitment for the Anti-Displacement Task Force is currently ongoing and applications are set to open next week. As I mentioned, the task force will be a joint community city leadership body making recommendations to City Council, including 5 Bureau leaders. The members will be selected and appointed in September and hopefully convene in October. The focus of their work will be to center Black, Indigenous people of color in conversation around displacement. We'll be looking for potential members who have experience or expertise in these areas: tenant rights, affordable housing development, transportation justice, arts and culture, houselessness, workforce development, education equity, climate justice, and or lived experience of displacement. And the charge will be pretty wide. They'll be charged with developing a shared framework for equitable development for Portland, identifying the most effective tools for stabilizing our most vulnerable communities, providing guidance in our update of the city's displacement risk analysis tools, and developing an agenda for further state and federal support that may be necessary to meet our anti-displacement goals. Finally, we really wanted to show this relationship between the task force and other Bureau advisory groups, especially such as the Planning and Sustainability Commission. We expect that there will be coordination and communication between the task force and other advisory bodies, and that the task force will be making their recommendations to City Council. City Council will then direct bureaus to do the work and with those recommendations in mind. And this way we hope the task force can have a collaborative relationship with other existing bodies. BPS staff expect to update the PSC as desired and needed on this work of the task force, especially as it pertains to land use issues. And through the task force process, we hope to determine the framework for incorporating the building blocks of equitable development seen here into every aspect of Portland's future growth and development. As Tom mentioned, we really have some work still left to do in this area. Finally, I wanted to share the 3 main ways that people can stay involved and up to date on this project. First, through participation with the Anti-Displacement Community Coalition. Organizations or individuals who are interested in getting involved should reach out to PALF for more information on how the different community groups are being engaged. Second would be to apply to be a member of the task force. Our applications will be up on a project webpage next week. And finally, on our webpage, community members can also sign up to receive updates via our project mailing list. And now we have some time for questions.
Eli, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm catching up here. Is it possible to stop screen sharing for the Q&A? Just we can see each other?
I'm looking for it.
Okay,
JP, if you can turn it off, I don't know.
Let's open up to questions. I see Mike's hand up, so start there.
Yeah, I was interested in Tom's presentation about moving further upstream, and rather than thinking only about mitigation right off the bat, looking at I'm interested in the parallels with the environmental issues and the hierarchy for addressing negative impacts on the environment and moving toward avoidance avoidance is definitely the first step, and then mitigation and mitigation on site in kind sort of is just interesting parallel, I think. And secondly, Andrea's comment about interacting with the PSC, particularly in instances where land use is involved. I just want to reemphasize we're the Planning and Sustainability Commission. And I think we need to continually think about the fact that we do have our purview, I think, lies outside of strictly the land use process, because I think there are ways, particularly with regard to climate change and issues related to sustainability, that are not necessarily tied to land use.
Thank you. Katie, I had not seen your hand up first, but I've got my screen oriented now.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Gosh, I have a whole bunch of questions, so be patient, folks. I wanted to just compliment you on the design. It looks like a great design, and I think it's going to be kind of a first to go. When you're talking about the power dynamic, you're raising up people that have less power and maybe more lived experience around what's actually going on. And one of the things when I look at anti-displacement, it's one of the things that I've wondered about this project, whether the scope is too small. Anti-displacement, it's almost like if you pull one thread, you're going to get into all kinds of other issues around employment, around education. There's just even policing. One of the ways that I've been looking at that policing can be made better is by building up neighborhoods, where the violence is taking place. So I'm just wondering if the scope is too small. And I know the history of the project, that it kind of got carved out because the Bureau really wanted to do it. It got carved out of people's work days, et cetera. And now it's gotten a lot more support. But I think actually with the very recent events that nobody's had time to adjust to, whether it should be a bigger effort, and just acknowledge the messiness and the interconnectedness and make it a bigger effort. So that's not really, I guess I'm just opining here, but has anybody thought about making it a bigger effort? I'll make it a question here.
Well, I do think we recognize that, and I think we're interested to see where the task force takes these discussions, because I think initially, and it's sort of reflected in that memo, we had the housing bucket and maybe the business space bucket and the workforce development and cultural space. And so that agenda quickly expands, and then we talk about zoning and infrastructure projects, and I agree with you, the policing and education, and it really grows from there. And so I think it's going to be a challenge to how do we focus this effort so that we can accomplish something and it doesn't drag out for as long as the comp plan drug out, kind of thing. One of the ideas that we heard is to really sort of think of us more of and this task force more as a policy lab. Like as part of residential infill at council, Commissioner Udaley has really brought forward the idea of tenants' opportunity to purchase program. Well, we can get the task force to dig into that and make a recommendation rather quickly to try and get that program up and running, and sort of not get overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem, but let's start, here's what we're doing, what's working, what's not, what else should we be doing, and start to roll that out. So there's a bunch of different approaches, but I think sitting within the model of a co-created, co-led, that's a conversation that we're going to have to get into with the task force on where they want to start how they want to steer this work.
So here's my another question that I have that has to do with the design. And I do want to thank you so much, because this is something that we've been asking as a Planning and Sustainability Commission, is that we hear about these projects when they're still kind of yeasty enough to make changes to. And that's really at the time when you can actually have the most impact. And so I'm wondering, how have you, the fact that this is such a multidimensional problem, I'm looking at that you've expanded the power base at one end. You're expanding the power base at one end. In fact, the low power people are getting more. And then who are they going to connect to on the other side? Have you thought about, I read in there that you're interested in bringing in other bureaus, but what about other state and the county and the other, power brokers who are going to listen more if they're part of things up front? Whereas if they have this commission that's coming at them later on in a year or two after they've gotten things together, and they're going to be asking for stuff from the state, they'll be asking stuff from the county, they'll be writing grants for the feds, right? And it might be a really good time to write grants for the feds, we hope. And I'm just wondering how much you've thought about how you get a bunch of people who don't have a lot of power, you give them a lot of power, and then they don't have, and then they get kind of disappointed later on because they're not able to connect with the power brokers that actually still have that power and they have the money, et cetera. So I'm wanting you to think about that. And then, and that's, I think that might be it. Just that, have you thought about changing the definition of a complete neighborhood then?
Yeah, definitely. As part of the sort of improving our analytical tools, both, how we define what neighborhoods are at risk, but also how we define access to opportunity. And I think those will be part, revamping those tools will be part of our work. And I think we have identified and sort of that need. Again, it's sort of how do you get started without making this too big? But we definitely see, sort of here's what the city can do, and here's where we, as a partner between the city and the community groups, need to go lobby for change at the state level or at the federal level, or work with the county on a program to be more collaborative in that way.
And I totally get that, but I think that if they have some input into it at the beginning, they'll be much more likely to listen. And let's see, there was one other thing. I've got my notes here, but there was something that you said in the stuff that you sent out, and it was kind of, and it made a lot of sense, and it shows that you're thinking in terms of systems. And you're saying if we build parks and we put sidewalks in, it inevitably causes displacement. And so then so therefore, when we put in parks and we put in sidewalks, we need to be thinking about displacement, and we need to plan for it. And so I think that's wonderful, and it's a wonderful way to think. But the problem that the little evil part of my little brain says, does that mean that you're not going to do anything in neighborhoods anymore? But it also means, so that's the evil thing that I think. But then the other thing is just if you have to do more every time you do anything, you really need you need all the players, because then you have to do a lot when you do things. Okay, so I just,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's the challenge around making these investments in sidewalks and parks. And I think one of the things that we want to explore through this process is like what level of that investment is at lower risk, and let's go do it. And then also, as Andrea pointed out, okay, we know we want to do parks and sidewalks and safety improvements in East Portland. How do we find the resources to address the housing issues or the retail space issues at the same time so we can do it all? We very much recognize that more resources, both in terms of building community capacity, but just building more affordable housing, has to be part of this strategy. But it is totally unfair to say, well, we got to stop because we might displace people.
I don't think anyone would say that. I'm just worried that it might happen.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to switch. Oriana?
I'm done. I need to let other people talk. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. That was I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about something before it's all done.
Thank you.
And I was just going to add that I know we're behind in our agenda, need to keep moving forward, but we will share out when the announcement for recruitment for the Anti-Displacement Task Force goes out next week. We'll share that with you all. So hope that you will circulate it to your networks and help us identify good people that you think should serve and apply for those positions.
Oriana, and then I had Steph, and then I'm going to jump in myself. So Oriana.
Excuse me. So before I ask a question, I just want to name something because it's concerning to me. And I appreciate where you're coming from, Katie. But as long as we as a body and institutions like the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability continue to give power to those institutions that we're feeling like we have to call in this moment, or that it's being named, they will have power. The way we give power to community is by keeping those folks out of the process and then not letting them come in at the end and fuck everything up. Sorry to swear on the record, but I'm a little raw today. So I think that's just worth naming, is that there's a solution that doesn't involve perpetuating the structures of oppression that already exist in this space and in this work. And I think I just like to encourage us as a body to do what we can to, when we have those thoughts, really challenge them and think about, like, where do we want the power to live and how do we get it there, and not do so in such an incremental way. And I think what's happening with this task force is really, really powerful. And so we have a charge to do everything we can as a body and everything we can as a bureau and everything we can as a city to ensure that this body has true power and is not disappointed. So just throwing that piece out there. But then a couple of questions that have come up for me. And I'll ask them all together because they're pretty short, but may have more lengthy answers. And I'm happy to take this offline as well in the interest of time. But the first is, I think when we talk about BIPOC communities, in particular in terms of displacement work, we sometimes need to disaggregate a little bit more. And I'm wondering what the conversations in the work have been specifically around Black and Indigenous communities, whether that's something that's being less more for the task force and the lived experience there, or just what the internal conversations have been about the specific experience and harm that's been done in particular to Black communities in North and Northeast. The second piece is what is being done from the task force structure perspective to kind of decolonize that work or remove white supremacist structures from the way that works. Like, we're still functioning within a system, but what are the ways in which it's being designed to break that down and truly shift that power more to community in the way I was just describing. And the final piece is, and this may be kind of putting a solution ahead of things a little bit, but just curious how land banking and alternatives to just building regulated affordable housing are playing into this, that help to preserve communities and allow for those kinds of investments that Katie was talking about to come forward, but in a way that is a little bit more protected for an entire community as opposed to just individual plots or individual buildings. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Tom, can I
go ahead and
address this first?
Yeah.
I just really, I wanted to recognize that, especially because we're working with the Community Coalition, and PALF has really been the lead organization in that. We are definitely very intentionally centering Black and Indigenous communities in this work, and in terms of our task force recruitment, one of the questions that they really wanted to have as part of just like the screening process was, are you aware and, what's your understanding of anti-Black racism? And are you committed to dismantling it? So just to give a little example of how we are really trying to lead with Black and Indigenous communities, front and center, because those are just two communities that have their own very different but particular histories with land, just land, ownership and dispossession that, I feel like really need to be discussed in a very particular way and really centered in this work. So definitely wanted to, kind of put that out there, that we are very aware of that and trying our best to do what we can with that. And in terms of land banking and equitable development, I think that is definitely one of those bigger picture items where we are trying to move the conversation into a broader discussion of equitable development and not just this is a housing project where we only talk about affordable housing development. Really talking about how do we get ahead of the curve on all of these things when we're in the planning stages, well ahead of these investments being made. And in particular, the Community Coalition has really stressed to us that they want to focus a lot on community benefits agreements that they are able to negotiate themselves without necessarily having intervention from the city. So I think that that's a really interesting and powerful thing that hasn't really been that successful in Portland, but has worked in other cities. So keeping in mind how we can get some community benefits out of investments that are being made from the private side of things too.
And I think also, to speak to your point about decolonizing the process, I mean, we made an intentional recommendation, and as part of the task force structure, that the 5 bureau leaders that sit on the task force are non-voting. So, we want the bureaus to be at the table and part of the discussion, but we want the recommendations to be made by the community. And so we want that collaboration, but have the community hold the power.
Thanks. Steph?
Thank you for that. So just to follow up very briefly, community benefits agreements, thank you for mentioning those. Also a standing question, how do we ensure that those have teeth? Because on the other side of that, we've seen a lot of CBAs get watered down or just forgotten about over the passage of time. And then to the conversation around BIPOC leading, just to name that the idea that we are following as a body. And when we are talking about prioritizing our agenda and looking at what potential tools or decisions are we waiting, that we find ways without adding to the capacity issues of, I'm sure, an already very in-demand task force that has not even been assembled yet, that we be responsive to those priorities and needs as a body and act on them. Thank you.
Thanks. Mike, is your hand back up?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I want to go back to Katie's comment and Tom's response. I think a very real problem we're going to have to wrestle with is the notion that we don't want to create communities that don't have parks, that don't have sidewalks, that don't have good urban design. And there are people, sometimes I think cynically, who push back against providing those things to the community based on displacement. So that's going to be a really huge challenge. Parks, natural resources, environmental programs already are strapped financially. And there's absolutely, I have no problem, no disagreement with trying to figure out what the unintended consequences might be, but adding costs to parks, for example, to account for the potential for displacement just isn't going to cut it. We do need a broader conversation about funding these programs that not only provide excellent parks, and protect the environment, but do provide funds to address affordable housing, to address all the issues we've been talking about. That's a really huge challenge. But just to say no more parks, no more sidewalks because there may be displacement is not where we want to go.
Oh. I'll jump in with a question. Is the Anti-Displacement Task Force, will they be, I'm imagining that various policy ideas will generate out of this process heading to City Council. Would that group be making recommendations through, and will they be empowered to take public testimony and to listen in addition to their membership?
Yeah, you know, as with most city advisory committees, we'll set up a process where people can submit comments and testimony on items that they're talking about. I don't know if they'll actually, I mean, whether we'll actually, you know, have the task force hold public hearings or how that will work. But eventually, you know, it is the city council that will act on these recommendations, and sort of that public process at council will be the ultimate destination for these recommendations. But yeah, creating that opportunity for public comment early on will help form those recommendations.
Okay, I guess I'll flag that sometimes it is powerful to have a non-group of politicians making the original policy recommendation to have the power of a public input process before it goes to City Council. We've certainly seen that in the PSC's deliberations, and that can help because the City Council sometimes likes to have things pre-vetted in some public way. So this might be a format where that would make sense. And I'll throw one more last question. Is just a thought after having in the housing and affordability section, it says using zoning and fair housing programs to expand housing types and affordability for people of all incomes to live in high opportunity areas, and just flagging that high opportunity areas have a lot of people living in them already. And so I hope that as the group goes forward, there's an acknowledgement that redevelopment does involve displacement. The question is who is displaced? And we have such an unfortunate history of lower income people and minorities being displaced, but there may be other people displaced who are more affluent. And I think that I hope there's an acceptance that that could be okay, in fact, appropriate. I remember talking to Alan Lazo with the residential infill project, who pointed out that although RIP is projected to decrease displacement for lower income people in low income neighborhoods, it decreases displacement more for affluent folks. So he was pitching appropriately to try and flip that narrative. So I hope that as this goes forward, there's that lens applied to it. Any other questions or comments for this stage? All right, well, thank you. Thank you, Tom and Andrea. And we'll look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
So I'm not sure who's leading this one either. I have to admit that I either didn't get notes or I lost them. So next on our agenda is Community Involvement Committee briefing.
Great, and for that, I'm going to turn it to our new equity manager, Nikoia Phillips, who manages our Community Involvement Committee, and she will introduce the panel.
Welcome, Nikoia.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having us. It's a tough day and a tough meeting. So appreciate everybody for hanging in there and making space for us to all bring our whole selves. So as Andrea mentioned, my name is Nikoia Phillips. I've been working in BPS for a little over 2 years now, and I'm actually really sad to not be joining y'all in community with video, but I have a really unstable internet connection. So I'm hoping this will help. And if I get kicked out, we'll work through it. Any hoosers. So as Andrea mentioned, I have been the equity manager in BPS just for the last month, but leading up to that, I served as our community engagement lead, focusing on racial equity strategies and strategies to better involve community members in the work that we do and our decision-making processes. And so part of that work was my role as the coordinator for our community involvement committee. And so I facilitate and coordinate that committee that is a committee of about 12 folks. And we'll be joined by two of those folks who I will let introduce themselves in just a minute. But we're here today because we want to introduce ourselves to you, tell you a little bit about who we are, what work we do, and talk to you about what it might look like for us to work together more in the future. So just to give you a little bit of background on the CIC, the CIC was originally convened quite a few years ago during the development of the 2035 Comprehensive Plan. In particular, they paid a lot of attention to the second chapter where the policies on community involvement were developed. And they met for about 5 years pretty consistently. And one of their last kind of orders of business right before the 2035 plan was adopted was to ask that the committee be a longstanding committee. They thought that it shouldn't be project-based, but that it should be an ongoing committee of community members that would have the ability to weigh in on projects as they came about in the Bureau. And so after the adoption, they sunsetted in their original form, and this new format for the committee was born. And that was about 2 years ago, right around the same time that I came on, actually. I came on and we had about 3 active members. And today we have 12 members. And so each of the members were selected by a panel. They all went through a rigorous application process, and our panel was very intentional about selecting members that were diverse in racial identity and formal education, lived experience, ability, you name it. And we were very intentional about making sure that this committee had a low barrier to entry. So we did look for folks that had a strong interest and some experience in land use projects and community engagement, but that wasn't a determining factor on whether or not you could serve. So we are really excited about the fact that we've engaged a lot of folks that are new grads, folks that are retired, folks that, like I said, have just a range of diverse experiences that really wanted to get engaged in this work. And folks are serving staggered 3-year terms. We've had about 95% retention of those 12 folks over the last 2.5 years or so. So really excited that people are staying with us and excited about the work that they're doing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how we make decisions. So the group is brought together to talk specifically about the community engagement process on the different land use projects that come through BPS. And so we don't meet often enough to see everything, but the projects that we do see, we focus less on the actual technical pieces, which is a little bit more of what y'all do here at PSC. And we look really specifically at those community engagement plans that sometimes the planners will report on by the time they get to you. And we've decided that we'd like to make recommendations on what those plans look like really early on. So we'd like to see projects early on and give feedback on how to structure the community engagement plans, how to do a power analysis to determine who the stakeholders are and which particular groups of community members project managers might want to uplift. We've talked a little bit about how to budget for community engagement work. So we really explored a variety of ways to weigh in on how the project managers structure their community engagement work. And over the last year, that's really been kind of the space that we've been in, is just kind of looking at projects as they come up, really experimenting with how we engage in projects, at what point in the project, like lifespan, we engage. And then also working on a new charter. Since we've been a new committee, we needed a charter to kind of lay out what it is that we were doing. And our chartering process, just so y'all know, was not an easy process. We've been focused on doing things collaboratively and by consensus. So we don't operate using Robert's rules. So it's a little more laid back than what y'all are doing here. But it's just different, just a different approach. And so when you do collaborative design for all of the ways that you approach your work and consensus decision-making, everything just takes a little bit more time. So our rechartering process took us about, or actually the first chartering, our chartering process took us about 9 months. And that was done with a series of interviews with some of the original members that were in the CIC when they were kind of developing the plan for the comp plan. Some of the staff that staffed it at that time, original members that joined as soon as the new CIC was formed, different planners, a couple of folks from community-based organizations and neighborhood associations that expressed interest in what it was that was happening in the CIC. So it's really just been a very collaborative, community-led process by which I really just, again, consider myself the coordinator. I don't feel like that I've really led the work in any way, just really provided structure and support and technical assistance as was needed by the community members involved to kind of shape the work. And so I would like to just read to you, and some of y'all should have gotten our charter in advance. So if you've had a chance to review that, awesome. And if not, that's okay. I just want to read a little bit of the preamble before I share some time with two of our members to kind of talk a little bit about their experience with our Community Involvement Committee. So our preamble says, or at least a bit of it, as members of the Community Involvement Committee, we are committed to authentic, transparent, and equitable public engagement processes. Our intent is to challenge traditional thinking and move the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability towards its own stated and admirable goals in the 2035 Comprehensive Plan and their Racial Equity Plan. We volunteered for this role because we believe BPS can do better for the city's residents, especially those who are traditionally underrepresented in planning processes. Our work officially started in 2018 when the City of Portland finalized its 2035 Comprehensive Plan. A comp plan advisory committee overseeing the community engagement during the development of the plan recommended convening and staffing a standing committee to guide its implementation. Thus, the Community Involvement Committee was born, but our purpose still needed clarity. In late 2019, we participated in a 6-month rechartering process. This involved training and experiential learning around land use planning, racial equity, bias awareness, and consensus decision-making, various interviews with both past and current stakeholders, and practical project application using popular education methods while we explored our vision and mission. The rechartering and visioning process clarified our scope of responsibility, provided guidance on how we will operate, and shaped the development of this charter. So I really love that preamble because I feel like it just kind of in a snapshot really captures kind of the sentiment of this committee, and in particular, the people that were involved in kind of creating this guide for what the work will look like of the committee going forward. And so at this time, I just want to share one of our members and give her a moment to share a little bit about her experience on the committee. Ms. Harity Chavers, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm testing. Can you guys hear me with my, okay.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay. Hi, hello. I am Harity Chavers. I am a member of the CIC. I recently graduated from Portland State receiving my bachelor's degree in community development. I chose to join this committee because I value inclusive engagement within the community and equity among diverse groups. Racial equity is really important to me. Being born and raised in Northeast Portland, I have seen low-income people and people of color who struggle or who struggle to get by or face displacement. And as the economic investments start to grow in urban places, I want to make sure no one is left behind and all residents can benefit from this new growth. Racial equity is an important component to have in our work because it is inclusive rather than being exclusive. Racial equity is a solution that gives equal opportunities to people of all races. From day one, being a part of the committee, we have worked on land use planning and legislative procedures. As a member of the committee, I see success as finishing a project from start to finish, seeing progress, learning new things and understanding it, and resolving conflict. We have given our input towards a few projects such as the Montgomery Park to Hollywood, dealing with the transit and land use development strategy. Within that project, the CIC members, we came up with the population of who would be affected by this transportation expansion, which included small business owners, homeowners, renters, affordable housing, and industrial workers. And as we split into groups, we noted that this project is on a budget of $45,000 to $50,000. And my group members and I wanted to make sure this equitable development plan included an anti-displacement strategy. We thoroughly thought about the focus groups and what outcomes would come out of this transportation expansion, as well as being on a budget. And once again, thinking inclusive and not exclusive, we thought about the outside focus group that wasn't mentioned, such as the houseless community within the area of Northwest to Northeast. As we asked, how would they take this change? Will this cause displacement? Will their needs be accommodated? Those were a few of many concerns we questioned for this project. And I feel as though being on the committee, the CIC brings a diverse perspective on projects due to our intersectionalities. I myself bring a perspective of a 22-year-old Black, educated, heterosexual female that grew up in a low to middle social class. I volunteered to be in this position within the committee so that I can have the opportunity to advocate and bring community voices into decision-making. And so far, being on the committee, I am able to voice my opinion and have the respect enough to be heard and to be thought about, rather than my suggestions going in one ear and out the other. I have seen things be taken into consideration, and being on the committee has definitely helped and brought a new perspective on projects that may have not been thought of within the perspective that everyone brings. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I enjoy the CIC, and it's very helpful to have a diverse members. I wish the other members could be present. It's really diverse within the age and social class and our identities. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Tierney. I hope the PSU program went well.
Yeah.
I did that a little while ago. I just wanted to say, first off, that we absolutely treasure the CIC role people play supporting these projects. And you're probably going to get involved in projects before we even see them sometimes. I hope you do. I'm thinking back to when we had the CIC through the comp plan project. And at the end of that, tiresome volunteers we just relied on them to make sure that we got feedback from a much broader array of the public than we would have gotten if it just been us and staff doing the outreach. So thank you so much for serving there. And I'm gonna, I think Oriana's hand is up.
We got one other person that wants to speak, and then if y'all wouldn't mind, just if you got burning questions, just hold them tight for one more moment.
Okay, apologies. Yes, Nikoia, please introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, so Tony Greiner, who's also a member of our CIC, has a couple of things that he'd like to share about his experience. So Tony, the floor is yours.
Welcome.
Well, hi, everybody. I've been a member of the committee for about a year, and I recently retired, and this was part of my what am I going to do with my life? Here's my chance to contribute to the city, which I've lived in for almost 30 years now. I was really impressed with I have been impressed with the intelligence and the commitment of the committee members. It's racially and age diverse, as Harony said. We're not so diverse in educational levels. I think we're leaning towards people who have at least some college. And we're maybe a little more middle class than working class. But still, it's a group of people that is committed to making the city a better place. I don't think anyone's walking in there with the idea of defending their turf. It's all an idea of how do we make it better. The city staff has done a really good job explaining city processes to us as best they can, given the complexity of all of it, and that's really helped us too. But that being said, I'd like to say we can work better together. While Eli has said that the group has been treasured, by your committee, there's a big sense in our committee that we're not being used to the full effectiveness that we could be used. There might be well, let me just give an example. In the streetcar project that Harry mentioned in Montgomery Park to Hollywood Extension, there was a presentation to us where we were given the material that would be shown to the public on the two options, going down Sandy on the east side or Broadway on the east side. And what the committee members pointed out, my committee pointed out, was that the streetcar is laden with problems, right? We know it's slow, we know it breaks down, they don't collect the fares because the machines don't work. We all know these problems. And the presentation that came to us was like, wow, the streetcar is just the best thing ever, and which street is going to get it? And it just reeked of dishonesty, to tell you the truth, that it sounded like the streetcar is just, wow, we're going to be fighting to have the streetcar come through our neighborhoods. And so we challenged that and said, until the public needs to know that the streetcar problems are going to be addressed before we start asking them for money and time and the hassle of expanding a construction project there. And so that was our feedback. So a while later, the public hearings started being held on this project, and I went to one of them over at the place on MLK. I can't remember the name of it now. And while I was pleased to see that the statements that the streetcar is the best thing ever had largely disappeared, there was still just, which one do you want? We're going to build it. Does it go down Sandy or does it go down Broadway? And that still felt like, no, you're not addressing the problems. Anybody who's ridden the streetcar knows that we have problems there. So in a way, I felt like, so what? What did we accomplish here? Not much there. So I could go on about other examples about that, but it does seem like we could do better. And Katie and Tom earlier today had talked about the importance of getting local people involved in the process. Well, here we've got the Citizens Involvement Committee, where our emphasis is to get local people involved. So Nikoia is going to be talking more about our ask of you, but I did want to point that out and give an example. And there have been some other things that have come in. I got an email that, I don't know why I got it, but it was about my comments on proposed changes in the Portland tree code. And there's a survey you took, A, B, C, D answers, and it wasn't written very well. The answers were often ones of, like Utah, do you want to be executed by hanging or shooting? There wasn't like, I don't want to be executed, or I don't want this provision in the tree code. If we had seen that earlier, we could have pointed out these flaws, but no, it just comes out as a finished product, and it's too late for us to do anything about it. So with that in mind, I'll be quiet now and let Nikoia come in.
Thanks, Tony. So y'all got to hear from a couple of our members. A little bit of information about how the conversations go in our committee meetings. Like I said, diversity of experience, diversity of opinion and perspectives, which I think really makes our conversations really rich and makes our recommendations even that much more representative, I think, of the things that will come up when these projects actually go out to the public. And so there's a couple of things that we need help with, because we're giving these recommendations, and for the most part, our project planners have been really excited by them and have really tried to use them to the best of their abilities to build their projects out in terms of the community engagement process, thinking about what questions to ask, asking even more challenging questions about, what our role looks like in the development of some of these projects and programs that kind of land in the BPS ether. But one of the things that we'd really like to ask from y'all as PSC commissioners is that, like I mentioned earlier, your focus has really been a lot more on the technical aspects of the work. And there are several of you, actually, in fact, many of you that care very much about the community involvement. And we know that your time is limited and that you want to engage in those conversations at a deep level, and that there are other things that are kind of in your realm of responsibility to kind of ask our planners questions about and do a deep dive on. And so what we would like to ask is that we would like to start to structure our recommendations in the form of either memos or letters. So something very similar to like what you would send to City Council after you've made a recommendation on a project. So we'd like to start to structure our recommendations in that format, and to be able to send those recommendations to you as a body before you see a project, so that you can kind of have that level of guidance and information on the things that we've picked up on, whether it was early on in the process or if we've seen it later in the process and have determined that maybe there were some steps missing in the community engagement process, or maybe there were some questions or equity considerations that have gone unaddressed or unanswered. We'd like for you to help us be another level of accountability for our planners and for our projects that come out of our bureau, to ensure that everything that we're producing and everything that we're doing has that community-led kind of information attached to it and has that equity lens attached to it. So that's the first ask, that you would accept our recommendations and actually take them seriously and consider them when you see a project. And then the second ask would be that Oriana Magnera has very graciously offered to support us in a liaison role, so that she can keep us informed of the discussions that are happening here at PSC on different projects. And we'd like to ask you to, in a more formal way, recognize her as a PSC to CIC liaison. So those are our two major asks for you today. And so we can let you kind of digest that for a moment. And if you have questions for myself or Tony or Harony, I think we have at least a couple of minutes for that if y'all have space.
Thank you, Nikoia. I'm going to toss out one just clarifier on the first ask you have, which I think we'd love to have your feedback. Would that be, presumably you would give feedback to staff before that as you're designing a community engagement process for a project, and then would you be giving feedback to us at the time we're receiving the project, so that we have your take on how well staff did and whether there's additional public involvement that maybe didn't happen as well, and that we can try and do special outreach to get that perspective in when it's in front of us? Am I interpreting that right?
Yes, that sounds right. So as of right now, we review a project sometimes in one meeting, sometimes it takes two, and then we have some discussion about it, and we write up a memo or a letter that kind of captures elements and highlights from our discussion and recommendations. And then that is sent to the project manager, and then we move on to the next project. So you would then get that letter or recommendation at the same time that we've sent it to the project manager.
Okay, thank you. So I'll open up to comments. Oriana has put her virtual hand up.
Excuse me. I just want to say thank you to Harony and Tony for taking the time to talk to us today and for the service and good work you're doing. You both brought up kind of a common theme that brings me to this question, which is, Harony, you had mentioned that you felt like the CIC was a space in which people took what you were saying into consideration. And Tony, you felt like maybe that isn't something that's translating into the Bureau or perhaps our body. And I'd like to ask of both of you, how can we show you that we are hearing what you have said today, that we are taking it into consideration, and that we are taking it really, really seriously? I think I'd like to get that on the public record and make sure that as the liaison, I can hold this body and the Bureau more accountable to making you feel heard. And then a second piece of that is just, how can we work with you in a way that we don't rely on you too much, and that we don't create like too much extra labor, but make sure that we're hearing you and considering you, but not leaning on you in a way that feels inappropriate or laborious?
Well, I'll weigh in with my 2 cents here. On the how do you recognize that you heard us? So just send us a note. Send an email to Nikoia. Say, okay, hey, we heard this, and we got your memo, and we're going to do X, Y, or Z, or maybe say we can't do it because of whatever reason. That happens sometimes. As far as workload, we could use more work, in my opinion. We've kind of got to the stage of educating ourselves, coming up with our process. I wouldn't be worried about overburdening us. It's a pretty verbal group. We'll tell you if it's too much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Or Randy, do you want to jump in? I'm not sure if you're able to raise your hand, so please.
No, I was just going to ask that to show that that we're being heard is just giving your time. Time is really beneficial to show that someone is really interested in what you have to say. So by speakers coming in and making time after they just worked a 9 to 5 to come meet us for a meeting at 7 p.m. just shows that that they're interested and actually wants to hear what we have to say. And also what Tony said, just like to follow up and just be thorough, to finish what you started rather than just coming in and then I never see you ever again. And yeah.
Thank you. So to your second request to have a representative from the PSC, our process will be, we're not all here right now, so I want to give everyone a chance to chime in with interest. And if it's okay, just put it on our agenda for the next meeting to open to pick a representative. But I'll ask first, Oriana, are you're game to serve?
Absolutely. I would be incredibly honored and can certainly commit to, in that role, really checking in with the committee on projects that they've heard or even projects that they haven't without, providing too much labor, but maybe adding a little bit to Tony's point, and then bringing that back and reflecting that. I'd personally like to see, as a request for BPS, that as part of staff presentations, staff is responsible and accountable for naming what is the feedback we've received from the Community Involvement Committee. How do we take it into account? And then as the representative on this body, I can provide feedback of like, well, the CIC didn't feel heard in this way, or felt like staff did incorporate that, but that wasn't sufficient. Or just serve a role, as a liaison to really listen in that space and help provide that feedback here, and reflected in my vote as well. I'll be frank that I think I would have a hard time voting in favor of projects that the CIC did not feel like had sufficiently listened to their recommendations around community engagement, and would be pretty vocal in terms of whether that's something that has to go back to the drawing board, or a project like the streetcar that has had problems on a number of levels, really asking the question, why is this coming before us if it's not really serving community well?
Thanks. And I would say I'd be open to our representative to the CIC briefing the PSC, but also members of the CIC could give us a little briefing during that time slot. I think that'd be totally appropriate. So I'll end this agenda item. Thank you much. Maybe we'll see you again soon. And so Nikoia and Karen, am I pronouncing your name right? Okay. And Tony, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got 2 more agenda items, and we already previewed that we're going to cut them a little bit shorter than expected. They know this. So first, we're going to go to Vision Zero, a briefing from Matt Kelly and Dana Dickman at PBOT. And after a 15-minute briefing, we're going to be concise here, so we may have to do some things follow up after meeting. We'll switch over to earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge. So let's start off with Vision Zero. Matt and Dana.
We're going to be brief. I do have some slides to share, so I don't know if someone can give me control or if someone wants to pull up the presentation. Should I do a share screen or the other way?
I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen now.
Great. I'm a little concerned about my connection. So when I do share, are you seeing?
Yes.
Yes. When I do share this, I may turn off my talking video because I'm not sure that the connection's going to hold for both things. Are you able to see that properly?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So first, I just want to say thanks for having us and how much I appreciate you taking the time to honor Tony at the beginning of the meeting. He is deeply missed, and I just really appreciated hearing from some of you about how much he is missed on this committee and as a colleague as well. I'm going to be very brief and give some updates on fatal crashes last year. We had initially thought we were going to come closer to year end, but scheduling challenges, and then some year-to-date crash information that's a little bit different because we're getting it from a different data source, but just so you understand how the changes with the pandemic are affecting crashes. And then our goal was to have a broader discussion that really touches on a lot of what you've already been discussing today with anti-displacement, but I think probably what we'll just leave it with is some big questions that we're asking ourselves as a program in Vision Zero, and then we can either have a follow-up or have opportunities to talk later. So just a reminder, our goal is to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries, but a safe system is how we get there. I think we introduced the concept of a safe system in our last meeting. It's really about overall systemic change, culture change. It's including vehicle change, changes to the way we think about speed, our roads, and behaviors. We are in the midst of an overall trend, or we were at the end of 2019, where we were seeing vehicle miles traveled increasing all over the country. And that was correlating pretty strongly with increased fatalities and serious injuries. Portland's trends were looking exactly like the national trends. One of the things I want to call your attention to is that we do use like longer term 5-year and 10-year crash data, because in any given year, we might have spikes related to the different modes. One thing that we have seen consistently is that pedestrians are almost always year after year disproportionately represented in our fatalities. We have a lot of people that are killed walking on our streets. We saw that particularly in 2017 and 2018, really high numbers of pedestrian fatalities. The last 2 years, 2019 and into 2020, we're seeing spikes in single vehicle crashes, both motor vehicle or automobiles and motorcycles. So it's been an interesting switch, and we'll see that a little bit in this. This shows 5-year traffic death data ending with our worst year in multiple decades last year in 2019. But you'll be able to see with the colored bars that the pedestrians represent the black line, or are represented by the black line. And you can see those numbers are proportionately high, but in the last couple of years, well, actually, we don't have the 2020 data on here, and I'll show you that to you next, that vehicle crash data is coming up really high. And again, this is a spike in mostly single vehicle crashes that are typically speed and impairment are primary causes of those crashes. These are our year-to-date deaths through just last week. You can see, I'll share the kind of COVID data later, but this is where we are to date. Again, you can see those single vehicle crashes are, no pun intended, sort of driving the numbers right now. I think one thing that is interesting about this is that we started the year trending similar to 2019, where our overall fatalities were quite high. And then I'll show you some data where the crashes came down significantly. And now as motor vehicle traffic is coming back up, the crashes are coming back up as well. So I just want to make sure we're clear that the data that I was showing you previously is crash data that we get from ODOT. We get that usually about a year and a half after the date or the year ends, with the exception of fatalities. This data, the COVID-19 data that I'm going to share with you, is actually injury data from fire and rescue. So they are getting call outs and reporting that it was a car crash and an injury related crash. So it's not comprehensive, but it definitely shows us trends. I just want to be clear that it's slightly different data sets. So what you're looking at here is an average 5-year monthly base average, and then a baseline trend. And then the orange represents the crashes by month. And so you can see we actually were trending slightly upward like we had been in 2019 in the early part of the year. And then when we kind of get to that March and April piece where we got into kind of the lockdown around the pandemic, crashes dipped precipitously in the city. And that was overall crashes, automobile, auto, pedestrian, bike crashes. We did a little bit of further study. These are the study areas that were used. So when you see this data, you'll understand that it's parsed out by these. This is the same kind of look at the trend line, but by those study areas. Again, you can see that precipitous drop in about March or April, with the exception of the Northeast quadrant, which was kind of on track to what it is for that monthly average. You'll also notice that as we got into May and June, that in East Portland and downtown, and a little bit of a spike in Southeast, we start to see those injury crashes and callouts come back up pretty quickly. I'll say that we don't have a ton of data on speeds, but working with our partners at the Police Bureau and then just hearing from community members at the same time that we had traffic volumes going way down on some of our larger roadways, we had speeds going way up. We don't have a lot of monitors to do like a citywide analysis. The few that we had showed that those top end speeds did increase. But just from community members and from police were telling us on streets like McLaughlin, bigger streets that were wide open, it was common to see people going 20 and 30 miles per hour over the speed limit. They were getting people regularly going over 90 or 100 on the freeways. And it was just like this sort of constant barrage in that kind of mid-March to end of April. Some of that has come down, but overall volumes have come up and speeds are still up in some areas of the city. This just shows you another kind of look at these trend lines where you can see overall crashes are trending down for 2020. And part of the reason to share this with you all is just because we want to know what's happening during the pandemic, but also because it connects so strongly to this discussion about land use and transportation connections and VMT. Well, when we see VMT up, we also see crashes go up. And when we see people driving less, we tend to see the crashes come down. No, I'm going through this really quickly. So just so that you know a little bit more of some focused work that we were doing in 2019, I will say that for Vision Zero and the focus on our high crash network, the pandemic hasn't dramatically changed a lot of our focus because the issues are still there. We have in 2020 or in 2019 and in early 2020 been completing road reorganizations in East Portland. Some clear examples are 102nd, Outer Gleason. There's another one on Southwest Capitol Highway in Southwest. We completed our left turn traffic calming pilot, which I believe we previewed here last year, which was really focused on reducing pedestrian crashes at signalized intersections. The early results show that it's really reducing speeds and helping to align drivers at those intersections. So it's kind of moving beyond pilot to a practice that we are going to deploy throughout the city. We have been actively doing speed limit reductions on all types of streets throughout the city and working sort of towards an internal policy of no streets more than 30 miles per hour in the city. There may be some exceptions with streets that are kind of access blocked. McLaughlin, again, might be another example. We don't expect pedestrians on McLaughlin, but the thinking behind it is really that we have people walking, biking, taking transit, driving on all of our corridors. And if it is an urban street, it shouldn't really be more than 30 miles per hour. And in some cases, much slower, where we don't have separation for modes. We are currently in the process of looking at a photo enforcement expansion for both intersection cameras and fixed speed cameras. That conversation is definitely being part of a larger conversation about community safety and what role does enforcement play in Vision Zero. There's a number of new and updated crossings, particularly of high crash corridors, And then we're focusing a lot on street lighting infill. You may have seen in the Bureau's budget, we asked for a significant portion of money to be brought over from an LED conversion savings into a lighting infill project. And that is specifically to support high crash corridors in East Portland and address streets that currently have single-sided lighting. So that will start imminently and is expected to take about 3 years. I believe Pete Chisholm-Winfield sent some additional updates about the heavy truck side guards, so I won't go into that. But those projects, both internally and through the Bureau of Sustainability, have been moving forward. Just big picture takeaways for us currently, that as a city, and this is true around the US, we need to continue to work towards protecting pedestrians in Portland. Speeds continue to be a serious safety risk. We've seen them increase. And we see still in a significant portion of our crashes that speeds are a primary contributing factor. They are certainly a contributing factor to the severity, but whether or not the crash happens at all. And also in Vision Zero, that we have these broader public health issues that are really interconnected with what's happening out in the right of way. We specifically want to mention houselessness. Early in 2020, we had 2 fatalities where people sleeping because they were unhoused were killed on sidewalks. And just the recognition that people are out and exposed to traffic and what, like the extra level of exposure that our houseless neighbors have is a significant issue. It's a public health issue that we're grappling with in Vision Zero. In addition, issues around hate speech in the right of way, people being targeted, people not being yielded to, issues around racism and hate in the right of way are omnipresent in our discussions around how to support street safety. And then on kind of this safe vehicles issue, that vehicles in general have gotten significantly bigger over the last decade. And there is evidence to suggest that it is contributing to greater injury and risk. And we're certainly seeing that it is inhibiting people's visibility of pedestrians. So those are just some like big picture takeaways from the work that we've been doing over the last year. This I just wanted to share, but really I'm just going to go on to the next slide, because what we're recognizing is that as we're doing the safe systems work around traffic safety, that all of the issues around displacement, housing, systemic racism, we can't build the safe system structure and focus it alone on traffic safety. This is so much the conversation that you were having earlier. The questions that we've outlined here are because we know specifically that in East Portland, almost every single one of the major roadways needs significant investment in order to be a safer street, to be the streets that people deserve. And we know that that level of investment could trigger additional displacement. We know that the disparities that exist in sidewalk infrastructure and access to schools that's already there, that's part of the legacy of systemic racism, means that that's the place that we need to invest more. But it is a challenge for our program because we want to act quickly. We know people are literally dying on the streets, but we also don't want to create undue harm. So these bigger picture questions for us are like, how do we move quickly and with urgency without exacerbating, that sense of urgency is kind of one of the pillars of upholding white supremacy and sort of those dominant structures. So how do we move quickly while having inclusive engagement, while making sure that our investments are not exacerbating the housing crisis, while making sure that we are being more interdisciplinary as we're thinking about investments in parks, in transportation, in housing. Some of the examples here of the CIC, like PBOT doesn't typically, maybe on streetcar, but we don't typically engage with your CIC. And on land use decisions, you don't typically engage with PBOTS committees. So how are we thinking more intersectionally about this work? Because we know, like, ethically, we're not going to not build sidewalks and improve safety in East Portland. We're not going to back away from those safety investments, but we also are fully aware of the challenges that level of investment might create. So how are we working together to mitigate that and to be more proactive in it? I know that we're basically done. I just want to frame up one other big issue that we're really grappling with, and that's really expanding our definition of what traffic safety means and what it means to deliver on a safe system. And this includes really thinking about people's personal safety and their experience in the right-of-way. As a bureau, we think a lot about the travel choices that people can make. And right now, community members, BIPOC community members, are making travel choices not based on just things like how much it costs to take transit, but on whether or not they're going to be harassed or assaulted in the street, whether or not they feel like their, teenage daughter can go on the Max and make it home alive. And so we are talking as a bureau about how those kind of deeper issues about personal safety need to be part of how we think about engineering and design more fully. Traditional traffic safety has really focused on crashes, and we're really moving to a broader definition of delivering on safety for people using the right-of-way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dana, can you? Yeah, and I appreciate you stuck with us for this meeting, and I know you're ready to go. So you could have definitely benefited from that. Yeah. I'm going to see if this. I'm just in here. Can you perhaps minimize relinquish the screenshot?
Yeah, there we go.
Getting some reverb from someone too.
And Dana, you need to mute as well.
Okay, maybe that'll solve it. Back to my sound engineering days. Thank you. So I'm seeing Chris's hand up. I think I'm going to ask Chris to share your thoughts or your question, and maybe one more, and ask if we can just all stay an extra 5 minutes on this one so we have at least 15 minutes for the next presentation. So let me know if that's a problem, but I'm going to hand the baton to Chris.
Thank you. I want to express my appreciation for the presentation this year, as every year, the efforts in PBOT for Vision Zero. I also want to note the increased focus on the racism aspects this year versus past years, and I'm glad we're trending in that direction. And then finally, I'm going to briefly plug a book. There is a book coming out later this month called Right-of-Way, Race, Class, and the Silent Epidemic of Pedestrian Deaths in America. It's by Angie Schmidt, who delivered the Niles Lecture here in Portland last year. So I would encourage people who want to really focus in on what's happening with pedestrians to pick up a copy of that. Thanks.
Thanks. Chris, can you send that out to the PSC for those not?
Sure.
Thanks. Steph.
Sorry, thank you. Very quickly, thank you, Dana, for that presentation. I'm really excited about the methodology of and the implementation of PED-PDX, which got updated after 30 years of us not having an updated pedestrian master plan. So, and I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but the street infill lighting is, the importance can't be overstated, and particularly, having come from the Walking While Black focus group, and we've, the idea of perceived safety, and as I also appreciate you highlighting some real tensions as former executive director of Oregon Walks. We had a lot of conversations and tension of like walkability, but walkability for whom and for how long and at what cost. So I'm looking forward to that. I have a lot of I will leave it there.
Okay. Well, thank you. And at what hours too. Yeah. So thank you so much, Dana, for joining us. And for PSC members who have questions, please send Dana an email. I think that's all right. Can you nod if that's all right? Okay, we just lost you. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'm now going to switch over to our last item, which is the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge. When we have large projects being proposed in Portland, we usually take a look at them, and this is one. So Patrick Sweet from the city of Portland will be presenting, along with Megan Neal from the county. So I'm not sure who's going to go first, but I'll ask you to start off.
All right. Hey, thanks, Eli. This is Patrick Sweeney with PBOT. Good afternoon to all planning sustainability commissioners. Again, name is Patrick Sweeney. I'm a capital project manager for PBOT and the city project manager for the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge project. I wanted to let you know I'm working really closely with Rachel Hoy and Bureau Planning staff, as well as my colleagues in Parks, BDS, BES, and other bureaus to make sure the current environmental planning process not only identifies and mitigates project impacts, but broadly seizes the opportunity a new improved Central City Bridge connection can provide for all users in the decades to come. As I'm sure you all know, Multnomah County owns and operates the Burnside Bridge, and Megan Neal is here to introduce her project team and share more information about this exciting project. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the opportunity to come back to this group. I believe the last time we came and briefed this group was September of last year. So I'm excited to come back and provide a project update, most specifically about some recent recommendations that have come out of our community task force, which met in June. They've made a recommendation on the preferred alternative for the project to be included in the draft environmental impact statement, as well as how we will manage traffic during constructions. So I just wanted to touch on those two recommendations today and then answer any questions you may have. And I'll try to make it quick. I know I want to respect your agenda's time. So hopefully you can see my screen. Just wanted to briefly remind the group the purpose of the county's project, which we call Earthquake Ready Burnside Bridge. As you may know, many of our downtown bridges would not stand if we had a major Cascadia subduction zone earthquake tomorrow. So the county feels it's important that at least we have one downtown bridge that can be immediately operable for all users right after an earthquake. It would help allow emergency responders cross the river and serve people, allow family and friends to reconnect and cross the river. And then also in the years after the major earthquake, as our community rebuilds, we feel like having a link across the river is important for our economy. And then finally, this bridge has served our community for nearly 100 years. However, it is crumbling and weight restricted, and we really would like to extend the service life of this crossing for another 100 years. So we're looking for a long-term crossing to serve our community and all users that is easier to maintain than what we have today. A brief touch about our overall project timeline. We are halfway through the environmental review phase, that green bar in the top left there. We anticipate publishing our draft environmental impact statement in January of 2021, and then following up with our final environmental impact statement combined with a record of decision in late fall of 2021. So we are currently funded through the design phase with the county's existing registration fee, vehicle registration fee. We just recently raised it this past fall specifically for this project. However, that does not get us all the way there in terms of construction funding. We are very grateful to be considered as a project that's as part of the upcoming Get Moving 2020 bond measure. Should that measure be successful, that would secure another $150 million for the construction phase. We are still working on looking for additional funding at the state, regional, and federal level. As I mentioned, we briefed this group in September. Since then, we have eliminated the fixed bridge from further consideration as part of the environmental impact statement. After we did a preliminary navigational study to determine what height the fixed bridge needed to be to allow all ships to pass underneath it, it just turned out to be very expensive and had a lot of impacts to the community and the urban streetscape. And then it was also just hard to access compared to today, given how far it would reach into either sides of the bridge. So that is no longer being considered. And so we have been working with evaluating the remaining 4 build alternatives as part of the environmental impact statement. So as I mentioned, our community task force has made 2 recommendations regarding the preferred alternative recently. So that first one is the recommended build preferred alternative. So up on the screen is a conceptual example of what we are calling the replacement long span alternative. And what this alternative is it replaces the existing Burnside Bridge with a new movable bridge in the same alignment with the same landing points, however, with far fewer columns underneath the structure, resulting in longer distances between the supporting columns. And so that's why we call it the long span alternative. And we are going through a bridge type selection study starting this fall to really determine what type of movable bridge the alternative should be, as well as what type of fixed spans adjacent to the movable bridge span the structure should be. And we plan to incorporate this information into the preferred alternative that will be included in the final environmental impact statement. And now this is not typical of a NEPA process. However, because we are working the NEPA process under a new executive order that streamlines the NEPA process, we need to make these decisions now in order to comply with the faster federal permitting timeline as required in the new executive order. So we'll be exploring a variety of movable bridge types like the vertical lift bridge type you see on the screen, as well as a bascule lift type similar to what is out there today. And then for the spans adjacent to the movable bridge, we have up on the screen the tied arch structure type similar to the Fremont Bridge, but we'll also be exploring the cable stayed option like the Tillicum Crossing, as well as a through truss option similar to Hawthorne or the Broadway Bridge. So there's a couple of reasons why having less columns underneath the bridge, there's a couple of reasons why having less columns underneath the bridge has led to this alternative being preferred by the community task force. So up on the screen, you see a photo of the site, and in light orange, you see areas of either side of the river that have highly liquefiable soils. And it might be hard to see, but in dark orange, we are showing the proposed location of the support columns. And as you can see on the east side of the river, we really don't have many columns in that highly liquefiable soil. And the benefits of this decision, there are several. So first of all, it's really good in terms of seismic resiliency. So the less foundations you have in this soft, movable soil, the higher likelihood that the bridge will perform well after a major earthquake. And then this alternative ended up being the least cost overall, simply because working in the ground and having a lot of foundations is very expensive and risky, which adds up to a lot of costs during construction. Another benefit of this alternative is that it will preserve the Burnside Skate Park in its current configuration, simply just experiencing short-term closures during construction. So this is instead of demolishing it or partially altering it. So that's another positive aspect of this alternative. This also removes a lot of the columns that are currently in Tomahawk Waterfront Park. So it really opens up that space for a more variety of uses with better views. And then because we are replacing the existing bridge with a new bridge, we have an opportunity to add additional width within our existing easement that we already have. So the new alternative will add approximately 10 or so feet on either side of the typical section, and this would allow us to bring the bike lanes and sidewalks up to current city code and even provide a physical protective barrier of some sort between vehicular traffic as well, between the vehicular traffic and the cyclists. So it'll improve safety for bikes, pedestrians, and ADA users. And then finally, with less structure in the river, this alternative has the least impacts to natural resources. So those are some benefits that come with this alternative. However, there are some serious impacts, which number one, it removes a structure that's on the National Historic Register, the Burnside Bridge. So we are understanding how to address that if this alternative moves forward. And then something that we're also considering, and it's a concern we're hearing from the community task force, is that because we have less structure under the deck, this means a lot more structure needs to be above the deck. And this significantly impacts the current views that are there today. So we are exploring that further in our bridge type selection phase that will be starting shortly. Now, the second recommendation that's coming out of our community task force is what to do with traffic during construction. And we evaluated having a temporary movable bridge on site, as well as closing the bridge completely to all users during construction. So we worked with the community task force to evaluate both alternatives, and they are recommending to fully close the bridge during construction. This would, some of the reasons why this decision has been recommended is that a temporary movable bridge would cost about $90 million and then add an additional 1.5 to 2 years to the overall project duration. And then also it will require additional structure in the river, which increases the impact to natural resources. So for these reasons, this is the recommendation that the community task force arrived at. So right now we are currently in a strong public outreach campaign. We released an online open house on August 3rd. We've been doing over 50 briefings about these two recommendations to get input and feedback and hear what the broader public thinks about these recommendations. During COVID, we because it's COVID is upon us, instead of doing actual bridge tours, we have a bridge tour video as well to orient people to the site, as well as animations representing the two recommendations and why they are being recommended. And then we also have a robust community engagement liaison program to do outreach in the non-English speaking community. I think we are doing outreach in 7 languages so far. A couple of key topics I wanted to touch on in regards to how our project is addressing or incorporating diversity and equity and inclusion. We, in addition to the community engagement liaison program, we also have been working for 4 or 5 years with the social service community on the west end of the bridge. We've been working hard to understand what the impacts are of this project, how to avoid certain impacts and mitigate others. So they're a group that we are very concerned about this project, and we meet with them frequently to as we progress through the project. One thing that's not mentioned on this slide is that as the project moves forward, should we be successful with our funding strategy for construction, we will have a community benefits agreement, largely based on the agreement that we had for the Multnomah County Courthouse, as well as have a supplier diversity program and workforce equity program as well as part of our construction phase. Another couple of highlights I wanted to share is that we are looking to certify this project through the Green Roads certification program at the gold level. Green Roads is like LEED, but for buildings, but it's for infrastructure. So we are starting that process now. In terms of community health, we are working with Multnomah County Health Department to perform a health impact assessment to determine what the impacts of this project are on people during construction, as well as permanent impacts. And then finally, wanted to highlight that we are closely coordinating with the city on a variety of levels with this project, including we are starting the early assistance permitting process, as well as the land use process, and then coordinating on a variety of other topics like potential mitigation and utilities. So just to wrap up, what to expect from our project over the coming 6 months. We will be, after our August outreach closes, we will bring the feedback and input that we've received back to the community task force to see if they'd like to modify or continue with the same recommendation for a preferred alternative. That recommendation will go to the policy group in October, and they will endorse or comment on the recommended preferred alternative. We will also, in October, kick off the bridge type selection phase. And then, as I mentioned, in January, we will publish our draft environmental impact statement and have about a 60-day comment period. Either during that period or right after, we'll probably come back to this group to provide a briefing. Then in May, we will wrap up the bridge type selection phase and incorporate the outcome of that study into the preferred alternative, and then publish the final environmental impact statement and record of decision in late 2021. So that is the information we wanted to share with you today, and I'm happy to open the floor to questions. I have several members from the project team here to help with any technical questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Megan and Patrick. And if you could release the screen, that'll let us see each other. Thanks. So we are over. Are there burning questions right now? If you want to share them that perhaps we can reply to afterwards by email, then raise your hand. Chris.
Well, just very briefly, I want to express my appreciation that you're doing environmental impact statement, unlike some other projects and agencies I could think of, and particularly that you're incorporating a health impact assessment. I think that's an important tool that we should use more often. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, thanks for Megan presenting to us, and Patrick and your whole team. I can't see all of you on there, but thanks for standing by. We originally had more time for this segment than we do now, so we appreciate you joining in. I will give you a wave. And if people have questions, then I'm just gonna say we should just email them to, who should we email them to?
Probably Patrick Sweeney, and then he can distribute them to our project team.
Okay, great. And we can answer back to everybody. So we can all.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, team. And with that, we are adjourned to meet again in 2 weeks. So thank you, everyone. Go out and enjoy the sunny weather.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.